It is practically tradition, dare I say rite of passage, for any self-respecting DMC YouTuber to give to their dedicated hit piece, where they shit talk the game, listing a bunch of the things it does wrong, spreading misinformation about the guns, and somehow spending longer dissecting the gameplay mechanics than they do in any of the other entries in this series. Since I am currently on my way to becoming the greatest DMC channel on YouTube, I thought it was about time I went and gave this game a proper scolding myself. However, the topic of this video will not quite be the usual. Because among the many video essays covering and harshly criticizing DMC2 on YouTube, there seems to always come up one generally agreed upon positive people like to point out as a redeemable quality. The Devil Trigger Amulet is a mechanic only featured in this game, always wonderfully put on display by the game's charming PS2 HUD, with the player being able to customize and modify their character through the so-called Devil Hearts, which you can find scattered around over the course of the game, some simply given to you as you progress through the missions, and many others serving as secret unlockables you need to go out of your way to find. By placing these different hearts into their dedicated slots, one round, one sickle, and one teardrop shaped, each with 3 available options, at least for Lucia, Dante only has 2 sickle ones, you are able to create a wide amount of possible combinations, 27 for Lucia and 18 for Dante, allowing for an unrivaled degree of self-expression, so you get to play the game the way you want, offering fun for the whole family. Or at least that's how someone could try to describe it to you, when clawing at the walls on the look for anything else besides real-time gun switching to aim praise towards. Yet a lot of the time people would go as far as saying that it's a mechanic they would like to see come back. In my DMC remake essay, which you should totally watch if you haven't, I addressed how while most things in past titles carried forward in some fashion, there were a couple mechanics exempt from this, which got lost over time. And while I felt it made sense to justify that being okay in the case of 2 shotgun dials, I did not go any deeper into detail on whether or not it was a tragic loss how the DT amulet never saw a return. But that was, quite simply, because it's a mechanic that in my opinion really has no place in Devil May Cry. DMC is a series of action games of the purest sort, that gives the player a broad kit of abilities to play with and offers practically a sandbox environment for you to show off your skills in any way you see fit. Honed proficiency eventually letting you go from just making it through combat encounters to absolutely demolishing them while pulling out all sorts of fancy tricks. These tricks, however, during the series' inception, did mostly reside in intended interactions and secret quirks of the enemies, which gave the player a much easier time, such as lining up your gun with the mask of a Sin Scissor, maximizing the impact of individual hits on Nightmare, landing on Shadow's Skewer for the crit kill, performing Helmbreaker on the back of an assault, or using Ifrit's Fires of Hell against the Frosts. While some of these kinds of things definitely do still exist in stuff like 4 and 5, most of these intended tricks are now largely confined to clash parries, which offer the player benefits for landing them, with other tricks just being fancy combinations of moves you learn to implement by experimenting with the game or through watching other people show off with cool strategies they came up with. This is much different from specifically the Ifrit against Frost interaction, because while granted it is very intuitive to try fire against ice, it is still pretty much a knowledge check that turns a genuinely tough encounter into an absolute cakewalk. After you learn about it, you will likely never fight Frosts with anything other than Ifrit ever again, unless you're going out of your way to challenge yourself. DMC3 sits somewhat in the same boat, with a lot of its enemies having some sort of elemental weakness, so in a game that can be genuinely very tough, why would you not switch to Cerberus when fighting Agni, or pull out Beowulf against the Vanguard? For a series that puts all the focus on the character's moveset, I find this kind of design quite out of place. And to get back to the DT amulet, it basically personifies the epitome of this awkward RPG min-max system, with you being encouraged not to look at your abilities and what would be the smartest way to use them, but to menu around until you assembled the most optimal combination for the situation you are currently in. Ooh, I'm fighting a fireball. I best be swapping from my flaming heart over to the frost one to achieve optimal damage. Wow, this situation's getting pretty tough. I should enter the menu and slot in the healing heart to boost my Devil Trigger's healing capabilities. It kinda takes you out of the game, and in most cases is really not an interesting decision to make, since usually there is a correct answer, and the only thing stopping you from going for it is the boredom of having to sit through the menu. And in general, it feels like the DT amulet more so adds unnecessary restrictions than actually adding benefits which expand the player's moveset. There are largely two Devil Hearts in DMC2 which bear a substantial and unique effect, those being the Aerial Heart and the Chrono Heart. The Aerial Heart granting Dante and Lucia the ability to fly, as well as having their highest damaging attack attached to it, ignoring Majin. That being a short-ranged melee strike in the air, for some reason called Round Trip in this game. And the Chrono Heart, functioning somewhat like the Bangle of Time, or more so Quicksilver. However, kinda awkward, since instead of just activating the instant you enter Devil Trigger, it supposedly turns on only as you deal a melee hit on an enemy, which for whatever reason refuses to trigger on occasion, so you will just stand there wondering why the screen hasn't yet gotten the touch of old Mr. Negative. Nevertheless, both of these hearts could be considered to make a substantial gameplay difference. The thing is, difference from what? Your other options in the Chrono Heart's stead are the Healing and the Offense Heart, both of which, as I pointed out earlier, turning the system into an extremely uninteresting min-max numbers game where instead of changing how you play, you basically just enable arbitrary boosts to whatever you are already doing. And I feel like the Chrono Heart being a passive effect you trigger when hitting enemies in DT, while not the worst idea in the world, is still a strange implementation, which obviously didn't necessitate this kind of system, as DMC3 would go on to show with its addition of Quicksilver as a separate ability, specifically when you are able to style switch to it at a moment's notice. The alternative to the Aerial Heart is the Quick Heart, which is a trade-off which you shouldn't be forced to make. There are some things I will criticize about DMC2 someday in a separate video where I want to get to the core of what exactly makes it so bad. But for now, let me just say that the Quick Heart speeding up Dante's attacks, and that being a benefit which you only gain by giving up on the Aerial Heart, which not only is required at certain points in the game for progression, but also, as noted before, holds some of Dante's and Lucia's strongest attacks behind it, is a horrible decision in a game that is already kinda making you starve for combat options. So unless you're willing to regularly menu back and forth between the two during gameplay, you'll be made to miss out on one of them for no reason. Look at DMC1. Activating Alistair DT would not only grant you a faster run and raise your attack speed, but it also gave you Air Raid and Vortex. You didn't have to choose between what aspect of the character you were willing to give up in favor of the other, you were simply given cool new stuff to work with. The health regeneration in these games has never been amazing, with 4 especially being a big offender, requiring you to stay in DT for several seconds for whatever reason before even beginning to slowly fill like a 3/4 pip of your vitality back up. But I think I prefer that simply being raised across the boards, like DMC5 went on to do, so it actually becomes substantial enough you can consider it a notable mechanic, as opposed to keeping it extremely weak unless you equip the specific thing which will boost your regen in favor of other things. Lastly, the elemental hearts of Fire, Ice and Lightning again are just weird and annoying, because Fire is the obvious damage buff, but due to certain resistances, sometimes you're better off switching to a different one, which just leads back to the lame RPG type stat management DMC players rightfully criticize other action games for. Ice can seemingly slow down enemies and bosses sometimes, which is valuable with how impossible dodging in this game feels on many occasions, and the Electro Heart has the interesting idea of extending the range of attacks with lightning strike follow-ups, sort of similar to the DSD chaser formations Dante would go on to acquire in 5, but the amount of attacks these lightning strikes affect are woefully limited, so for the most part it will again make little difference unless you decide to attack metallic enemies with it to reap the benefits of its lame elemental damage bonuses. All of this is ignoring the hilarious addition of Lucia's third Sickle Heart, the Aqua one, which literally serves no purpose besides making the underwater section suck slightly less if you have it slotted in while swimming in Devil Trigger. There is no value to this. There is not even a choice. You just do it, and afterwards that section of the game will become slightly more tolerable. Which one last time begs the question, what does the amulet add here? Notably, faster swimming speed may just as well be an ability innate to Devil Trigger, instead of a stat buff you need to remember to enable. It's a bit like Breath of the Wild and its armor bonuses, where after you unlocked it, there is absolutely no reason you should have to equip the Zora armor every single time you need to swim up a waterfall. And if you think about it, any moment you are meant to climb for an extended period of time, you're actively hurting yourself by not opening the menu and equipping the whole climbing set until you've reached the top. So I feel like at the end of the day, looking at all these options the DT amulet actually provides, it is easily proven how it is a mechanic that either adds very little, the things it does bring to the table being the kind of one note percentage based damage increases you see heavily criticized in modern live service games, or it straight up locks abilities away from you in their own individual boxes, which the previous title happily allowed you to use in unison. Meaning if the DT amulet were to be reintroduced to the series, as some people seem to wish for when they talk about it in a positive light and say it's one aspect of DMC2 they would like to see return, I'm convinced it genuinely wouldn't lead to anything good. It is a mechanic that deserved to be left behind. And hopefully this little video made a convincing argument for why. One aspect I will give to this mechanic is that, despite their issues, the Devil Hearts are definitely a more interesting reward for exploration than you only being able to really search for blue orb fragments scattered around the stages, which is basically all the rest of this series has to offer from a completionist perspective. If you would have any ideas in regards to what could make for interesting rewards to populate these games' level design, I'd be very curious to hear your suggestions in the comments. I know I may seem ungrateful with how I keep trying to get people to watch my DMC remake video, since I am quite desperate to get my perspective out there and stand against the never-ending tides of demand for it, while there might still be a fighting chance. But I am genuinely very thankful for 2 of my videos within the span of just a few weeks now having managed to border 2,000 views. And that some people are willing to have meaningful discussions about them in the comment section is extremely cool. I got a lot of other ideas in the works, so hopefully I manage to maintain a somewhat regular upload schedule. And who knows, maybe soon I will trump the weird MS Paint Windows Movie Maker Majora's Mask animation I made 8 years ago. Like and subscribe and all that shit.